Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's conversation with the FAA and public safety. I'm Charles Werner with Drone Responders. John, take it away. We'll talk about
Uh,
certificate of waivers.
Hello, everyone. John Meehan here from the FAA, and I work in AFS 751. That's the group that does waivers, and probably the group that's handling most of the waivers that you have here. Uh, I'm also joined on here by a person who's in the deferred retirement program. I think that's what they're calling it. Michael O'Shea. I think most of you know who he is. He's looking very relaxed to me. I am not in the deferred retirement program, so I'm doing Mike's work plus my work.
Yeah.
Also have Jason Day from the Texas Department of Public Safety and the usual team here. Steve Pansky is unable to join us today. Unfortunately, he's got some personal business to take care of. Uh, and So I just, Charles had asked me to, it's obviously a hot topic right now. Charles asked me to talk to you all and give you kind of an update on what's going on with these 91-113 waivers. Many of you understand that the process has changed. And remember, I'm going to kind of back up a little bit and remind everyone that when you operate a drone in the National Airspace System, you're under Title 14, and you'll either operate under Part 107 or you'll operate under Part 91. And so that the flight rules are all, for what you do, the flight rules are all under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations. The waivers that Charles has asked me to talk about pertain to Part 91 waivers. That's kind of the newest thing. That's the hot topic of the day. And these are, you may be aware that I think it was early April, the Office of Primary Responsibility changed back to flight standards from air traffic for these certificates of waivers or authorization. I think you all used to call them COAs. Now some are calling them COWs. They're actually both in the documents that we're issuing today. They're certificates of waivers and authorizations. Authorizations pertains to the airspace piece. Waiver pertains to the regulations that you're getting waivers from. In these new 91-113 waivers, we're actually waiving 9 different Part 91 regulations. I won't go into the exact ones. I don't have them memorized. The big one, the main one that we've been always waiving in the past was 91-113B, which is essentially the see and avoid rule that has to be waived in order for you to operate a drone under Part 91 in the National Airspace System. So with that kind of preamble, here's kind of the numbers so far. So since mid-April, 300 of you have submitted waiver applications. 214 have been approved. There are 78 in the holding pattern, pending, I'm going to call it. Interestingly enough, of the 78 that are in the holding pattern, 58 are awaiting a response from you. Only 20 of the 78 are waiting action by the FAA, and those 20 pertain to operations where you're proposing to use some sort of electronic detection and avoidance system, and those typically have to get additional scrutiny, and those are the only ones that are pending right now. Here's some other stats that I have. So 87% of the submissions are for I call it the low tech 200-foot shielded ops waiver. This is where you're using obstruction shielding as your primary collision avoidance mitigation. 13% of the submissions are asking for higher altitudes, up to 400 feet essentially, using some form of electronic detection and avoidance system. So, and that fits with our expectation that we thought that about 90% of you were going to want the lower expense, the lower technology, the obstruction shielded waivers. And we thought most of you, we figured about 10% of you had the money and the resources to get the more sophisticated systems. And that seems to be bearing out in the statistics so far. The average processing time is under a week. I actually plotted this. We went from 3 weeks in April. We actually got it down to under a day when the information is submitted completely. It's that fast of a turnaround. So we've gone from almost a year to really less than a week. The ones that take a little bit longer are the ones that are using some detection and avoidance system. And if your vendor is proposing a new system that either the FAA doesn't know yet, or it might need FCC approval for aviation usage. Some of these systems we've seen that they're either experimental or they're not approved for aviation, that you might want to check with your vendor to make sure that it's approved for aviation navigation purposes or aviation usage.
So John, can I ask you, you said, let's see, 58 are awaiting response from the applicant.
From the proponent.
What is the problem with what you have to go back and ask for?
Well, I was just coming to that. The delays, believe it or not, are mainly due to illegible submissions. We can't read them. And this is really stunning to me personally, because we've made it a checklist where you simply have to put your initials, and then there's a section where you have to write your information, either type in your information or write it in. And we can't, maybe everybody's gone to medical school or something, but we can't decipher the handwriting. This looks like hieroglyphics. So, but the other delay is that they've sent something in, and the team has asked for clarification on something, and radio silence. They've gone Nordo. And so check your inboxes. Check, if you haven't heard from us, check your spam filters. It might be there. So if those 58 of you who are saying the FAA doesn't care, we don't write, we don't call, you should check that, because we do love you. We do want to help you, and we are, trying to help you, but you need to help us help you. So and the other reason for the delay is that when that 10% of you who are asking for to use the electronic detection system, what we're finding is they'll put very little information on the form describing the system. And there's a form that we recommend that those of you who want to spend the money getting the sophisticated systems, there's a form called the CMD. I think they call it criteria for making a decision about DAA. There's about 30 different blocks of information there. Here's one that won't work. We're public safety. Give it to me. Not going to do it, right? If it asks for describe the system components and latency, get your vendor to help you with that. Let's see. The other thing I want to tell you is that these checklists and these templates are continually evolving. We believe very much in the continuous improvement model. We didn't want to wait for perfection, because if we waited for perfection, we'd all retire like Mike O'Shea before they actually got issued, right? So our view was, look, we're going for the 90%. Yes, we know that they're not perfect, but we know that what we've done is better than was done before. But I can tell you that already, for example, even this morning, we were working on modifying the 200-foot shielded ops checklist. I'm working on that today. We worked on the template this morning. There's been a few minor tweaks to make it more clear and to address some great suggestions that we've gotten from folks on how to make it more accurate and more clear. So that's coming. I hope that this week we'll have the 200-foot shielded template done this week. We'll probably get to the next one, the more complicated one in the next week or two. Of course, we have the federal holiday coming up, so that might slow us down a little bit. But I expect the 200-foot shielded ops template to be coming out next week. So watch for that. I'll send a copy to drone responders, LEADA, APSA, and our drone pros will have it when they get it. So how's that for an update?
That's great. Just to let me recap and ask you a couple questions. I have been receiving calls as well as you have. And what I find, what's interesting is that people don't understand what exactly they're going after. Since we've got this new quote unquote DFR waiver at 200 and 400, is that everybody seems to think that's what they need to get. And from my conversations with them, and I'm guessing from your conversations are probably similar, is that's not the case. In some of these cases, they want to fly tactically and they want to fly a mile and they want to do different things. But the bottom line is people need to really think about what it is they are trying to do and what rules they're trying to waive. Is that a safe statement?
Yeah, that's a great comment, really, that really stimulates a lot of thought from me, really. And I do concur with that. You know, when we all love to chase the bright, shiny object, right? It's just human nature. When I have conversations with public safety in particular, one of the, I'm hearing a lot like, John, I want a DFR. We want to do DFR. And, many of you who know me say, yeah, well, I want a chocolate milkshake too, right? I don't know what that means, and DFR, and this is really, I think this is kind of important when you're talking to the FAA. DFR is a concept, right? There's 4 people on this on your video screen right here. DFR to me is probably different than DFR to Jason, probably different DFR to Mike, and Charles has, split personalities anyway. He's probably got like 30 different versions of DFR in his head, right? But when you talk to the FAA, what you're coming to us for is, hey, John, I am operating under Part 107. We want to do semi-autonomous operations with a drone. I need to waive these regulations to do that. So how do I get a waiver to do that? I can talk to you. I understand what you're doing, right? I understand what you're talking about. I know that you know the rules. Conversely, on Part 91, hey, John, we want to do a semi-autonomous operation with drones, and we need a waiver to 91.113B. We need a waiver to weather. We need a waiver to this, and this. Okay. Because remember, when you come to the FAA, you're all operating under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations. You have to comply with all of that unless you get an exemption or a waiver. And the FAA is the regulator for that. And so when you come to us and say, we want DFR, that's nice. We don't do DFR, right? We do waivers to regulations and airspace authorizations to do that. So if people, and Charles knows this, I've started kind of pushing back on folks, and I don't mean to be a jerk, but it's that maybe that's that instructor pilot in me that says, okay, well, what rules are you flying under? And I find many times people go, I don't know, I just want that really cool product called DFR. It's like, well, then you need to go talk to somebody else, because you're talking to the federal government who has regulations that you have to comply with, right? And I find that when we have that conversation and I ask which regulations under Part 91 or Part 107 they need to get waived, if I get the blank stare, then I know they don't know the rules, right? And if you don't know the rules, you probably ought not to be flying an aircraft in the National Airspace System, right? Because you have to know that, or you're putting yourself and your agency at risk.
So let me change gears.
For noncompliance.
Let me change gears before you do that. The big question is COAs. Okay, what the hell's going on with COAs now? Okay, I need a COA jurisdictional COA. I need a tactical be obvious on site COA. I need those, right?
Mm. Yeah, what do you need, right? What are you trying to do, right? That's kind of alludes to your original point, right? One of the things I think we all need to kind of step back, even those of us who are very experienced, like I know Jason, he had an extremely robust program, right? And it's good to kind of take a step back and say, and I had this conversation with a police department yesterday who's very experienced, and they have 5 or 6 of these documents from the FAA, and they're like, my goodness, there's, we
You
need
mean like
this
multiple
and that. And
COAs?
yeah. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we could just kind of simplify everybody's lives and move to, do you want to operate under 107? Okay, you need a waiver to this, and this to operate under 107. And if you want to operate under 91, you need a waiver to this, and this. For, let's, all these other COAs, right? They're because why does it matter to the FAA? Well, if something unfortunate happens, and let's say we get a complaint, or there's an incident where there's somebody been injured, the FAA is going to show up and say to the crew, okay, what flight rules were you flying under? And if you have 7 different documents, that you're just, how are they going to know that, right? And and they go, I don't know. It's like, ooh, that's not a good answer, right? Okay, well, I'm flying under 91. Okay, well, so under 91, you have to have a certificate of authorization and a waiver from the FAA. Let me see it. And if they'll start shuffling papers and pull them out, right? So what's happening to them all is most of those are going away, is what's happening. There's no more. Well, let me sort of back up. We're not renewing. If you have a tactical or a first responder or a jurisdictional or a blanket, those are not going to be renewed. If it's still valid, you can still operate under that. You still have to comply with that. When that expires, you're going to have to get one of these new ones. And actually, I would encourage you to consider getting one of the new ones and then shelving the old ones anyway, because I think you're going to find the new ones to be a lot more understandable and a lot more uh, uh, able to comply with it better, I think. But that's my personal opinion. I've been involved with it. I mean, this discussion could go on for hours, but the idea is that, and that leads to the question of, well, why the heck are you doing that? And the answer is these new waivers kind of move in that direction anyway. That, for example, you don't need a jurisdictional COA anymore because the new 91-113 waiver comes with it. You don't need a tactical anymore because the new waiver comes with it. You don't need so we've taken the good parts of what was really good for the industry, and I'm going to give a shout out to Mike here. Mike and Carrie Fleming worked very hard to kind of crack the ice on getting the FAA to understand better public safety's needs, and that's where I think the first responder and the tacticals kind of emerged. And a shout out to Steve Pansky. That the whole team worked very hard on that, and this is kind of the next stage in the evolution of where we're going. And it's really about, take a step back. You're under Title 14. What do you want to do? I want to do this. Okay. And to do that, I need to get relief from this regulation and this regulation. Okay. So these new waivers, I think, really kind of take the best of all of that, scrunch it together, and now you got the one document for Part 91 ops, and you're going to have one document that'll do what you need to do under Part 107.
And just to clarify, for the new ones, there's no more monthly reporting, but you have to have the data.
More.
There's no more NOTAMs. And if you go for 107, you have no pilot record database.
Yeah. So, NOTAMs, the NOTAM requirement is gone. Marginal utility there. And remember, these documents were designed 8 years ago, right? And we've learned a lot in those 8 years. And we've learned that people putting up a NOTAM in the Dallas area for 364 days up to 400 feet, somewhere in the vicinity of, it's not really achieving what the intent of NOTAMs are, right? And we were starting to put these administrative burdens on the departments, and they said, well, we'll just file this once and we're done. I get it. We get it. So we're moving away from that. No more NOTAMs, no more monthly reports. What was the other one? I forget some of the other things that they had to do but you do have to collect the information, particularly if you're flying under Part 91 as a public aircraft. Remember that the pilot records database applies to you, and that's Part 111, Subpart C, Charlie. You need to look at that. If one of your drone pilots wants to go moonlight for a drone 135 operation, that drone 135 operation is going to have to check that pilot's background, and they're going to list you as one of their aviation employers over the last 5 years. And you're going to have 2 weeks to come up with all the information that's required in the pilot records database. Now, is that a high likelihood of happening? No, probably not, right? But just be aware that you are going to, if you fly as a public aircraft, you do need that. Part 107, you don't need to do that because the FAA does that. They keep records on their pilots. There's things like if you have disciplinary actions of this person, there's other reporting. If you dismiss them, termination for cause, that sort of stuff. You'd have to look at the Part 111, Subpart C for that exact information.
And to get this right, there is also under Part 107 a waiver that resembles the same waivers that you would have on the Part 91 side for DFR.
What's
Not
DFR,
saying DFR,
Charles?
I'm just trying to give you the
right. Yeah. So this, they're the same risk profile, right? If Jason Day operates a drone this morning under Part 91, and then this afternoon under Part 107, which he could do as a qualified entity, it's, as far as the risk to the NAS, it's the same risk, right? So what we're trying to do is trying to evolve them both to the point where we're going to be agnostic. You're going to be agnostic to which set of rules. Now, many of you should get the whole 91 discussion out of your head because you're not eligible per the law to operate as a public aircraft. And just because you're public safety, it doesn't mean you're automatically allowed to operate as a public aircraft. You have to look at 49 USC, United States Code 40102 A41, and that defines what a public aircraft is. And the long and the short of it is, if you're a 501(c), you have to fly under Part 107. Part 91 is not an option for you. And that's by the law, not by the FAA, okay? So what else can we talk about?
The volunteer
Can I
fire
jump in there for
departments.
just a second, Charles? Because
Yeah, one
thing I
second.
just wanted
Volunteer. Let me just say this: volunteer fire departments, search and rescue, non-government organizations, those kind of things are what are not eligible for public aircract operations. But there is that capability of getting it under
Yes.
Part 107. So now,
Absolutely.
Jason, take it away.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of going back to what John was saying before, and now the point he just made is that really 107 is where all agencies should start, right? That's where you get your feet wet before you even start thinking about any of the Part 91, the more advanced operations, right? These COAs, we applaud the FAA for making this process a lot simpler and allowing more advanced operations, but it is our recommendation, I think everybody on here, this is not where you start. You don't start by saying, hey, I'm just going to go do obstructed shielding and go do these advanced operations. You need to have a training program. You need to have a maintenance program. You need to have a UAS program, not just a guy with the drone, before you go do this advanced stuff.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. Thank you for bringing that. It is one. I mean, the FAA's position is it's up to the entity to decide, right? From a personal point of view, as Jason said, crawl, walk, run. It's good to 107 has fewer rules. 91 has a lot of rules. If you're a drone pilot and you're flying in a Part 91, you're supposed to know all the rules. So, it's a lot easier to learn the 107 rules It's a lot easier to get your feet wet, as Jason says. You can use LAANC. You can really it's the entryway into aviation, in my opinion. And I guess the other thing I want to kind of say is, and Charles knows this. Actually, all these guys know it. If you go to his drone responders webinar, I always have a little trick question. I ask, how many of you have drones? And everybody raises their hand. And I say, how many of those of you who have drones, how many of you have a flight department? And about 95% of them put their hands down. I say, oh no, get your hands back up, right? Because in the eyes of the FAA, you have a flight department. You're a professional aviator flying an aircraft, and you're operating in the National Airspace System. You may not think you are. Your chief may not think you are. John Meehan thinks you are. You're a flight department, and you better have it together, right? And I do recommend, as Jason, you kind of reminded me that if you have a sister unit or a good relationship with a helicopter unit, go talk to them, because they know how to keep aviation records. They know how to train aviators, right? And what's very interesting to me, I always ask them, hey, when you hire a new pilot, do you ever let them apply if they don't have an FAA certificate? And they always say, heck no, that's a prerequisite. And I ask them why. And they say, because we want them to learn the basics from the FAA. We want them to learn how to fly in the FAA system, and then we'll focus on the mission training, right? But we don't want to teach them how to hover. We want them to know how to hover when they get to us. It's the same kind of idea, right? And the other reason is that not every mission you fly can be operated as a public aircraft anyway. So if you want to get reimbursement from FEMA, for example, then you have to that's a Part 107 operation. Why? Because under the public aircraft statutes, you cannot get compensation, and that's considered compensation. So it can be for a non-commercial purpose under Part 91 as a public aircraft. So as Jason pointed out, right, and as Charles pointed out, what do you want to do? Well, if that's one of the missions you want to do, you're going to need Part 107 certificated pilots, because if you want to get reimbursement, that's a commercial purpose from the compensation legal mumbo jumbo aspect of it.
So let me clarify something. That's I'm looking at Part 107 and I'm looking at Part 91 for a similar type of remote pilot operation to arrive at a scene first. Okay, it's not DFR. It's just, it is DFR, but I'm not saying it.
You want to be a semi-autonomous operation beyond visual line of sight of the pilot, operating over people and moving vehicles.
And so I'm looking at Part 91 and I'm looking at Part 107, and they look really close to me. Now, I also think that in the Part 91 transition, you also removed the emergency mission part for the general Part 91, correct? The only time that you have to really apply that emergency response is if you want to fly without a parachute. It's got to be a life-saving mission for that without a parachute thing, which kind of concerns me, because I'm sorry, I'm one of those proponents for parachutes because I don't like drones falling out of the sky.
Yeah, so what Charles is talking about is, and again, they're the same risk profile, right? So if you're operating a small UAS over people or moving vehicles in the United States, if you were a civil aircraft, and in Europe as a civil aircraft, and in Canada as a civil aircraft, you have to have at least what we call in Part 107, you have to have a category compliant drone, which means that it goes through some testing and all that, and it has to be deemed that this drone is authorized to conduct a Category 2 or a Category 3 operation over people, right? I don't want to go into too many details on a webinar, but you should study that because when you now operate under Part 107, for example, when you operate over people or moving vehicles with humans inside, that operation is put into one of 4 categories of operations. And if you're going to do that operation, you need a category compliant drone, or you need to get a waiver, right? Because you can't operate over people. The rule says you can't operate over people unless you have a category compliant drone. That's what the rule says. You have to comply with the rules, right? Under Part 91, since they're the same risk profile, we wanted to have the same mitigations, because when we've looked at, hey, what are the risks, what are the hazards, what are the mitigations when someone wants to operate a small UAS out a distance beyond visual line of sight of the remote pilot, what are some of the risks? Well, if you can't see the ground, it's over, which you can't if you're operating BVLOS, then you can't know if it's operating over people or moving vehicles, right? Because you don't have vision unaided at that point. You're either using the cameras looking down, but most of the time the camera's actually looking in the direction you're going. You don't have 360 degree or Z axis. You don't have any of that situational awareness. Anyway, so to come back to the question you're driving to, under the Part 91, 113 new waivers that we're issuing, we require you to have a Part 107 category drone, and there's about 27 of them now on the FAA accepted list. 3 years ago, there were none. We were writing a lot of waivers for 10739. Now I think there's 27 or something of them. I counted them the other day, and it's really great. The industry has responded. So guess what? You could comply. You could operate it over people moving vehicles if you have one of them. You don't need a waiver because it is a category compliant drone. So under Part 91, we took the same approach to say, hey, what's the risk of operating a small drone beyond visual line of sight? Well, a collision with another aircraft is a risk, and also injury to people on the ground or moving vehicles. So it's the same mitigation. So we require you to have either a Part 107 category compliant drone, or you get a parachute recovery system if it weighs more than 0.88 pounds, or prop guards if it's under 0.88 pounds. Or in very, very limited circumstances, we said, all right, for those to give the public aircraft community time to adjust to the new technology and the new reality, in a life safety emergency, they can briefly operate over people for the extent of that emergency. Now, I've had lots of discussions with folks that, we're using our drones for call outs. I said 100% of our call outs. Okay, well, 100%, not every call out is a life safety emergency, right? So you have to be able to defend your decisions, the intent, and I keep coming back to what's the intent, right? The FAA wants safe outcomes. We want no collisions. We want no injuries to people on the ground, right? That's what we want. If there's no issues that way, it's going to be good, right? So if you have the wherewithal, the money, or you can get grant money, please do try to get that, because those drones have kinetic energy and they can seriously injure or kill someone, particularly your heavier drones that public safety operate. And I know from talking to many of you, how many times I think Charles calls it the pucker factor, right? How many times have you had a drone suddenly lose power and fall uncommanded out of the sky? We know it happens quite often. And particularly those of you who operate in high electromagnetic interference areas, remember your drones operate on home Wi-Fi, unlicensed spectrum, right? So there's some risk there for that. So just, we could go on about that too, but I think we need to move on.
The point that I'm trying to make here is that with the exception of that one exception of making that allowance for these life-saving missions, there is nothing really different between the Part 91 DFR waiver than the Part 107.
That's right. That's right. And in fact, when we designed that public safety organization Shielded Ops 107 waiver, it was a combination to 10731, visual line of sight, 10739, ops over people, 107-145. That was originally designed to enable all of those 501(c)(3)s, volunteer fire departments, SAR people who wanted the capabilities that tactical BVLOS COA gave them. And you notice they're very similar in terms of what they gave you. Well, you're going to see in the next few months, we're going to continue. Remember, I said we were into continuous improvement. I think that we are, in fact, I know we are looking at, once we get these 91-113 waivers sorted out, you're going to see a lot of those terms and special provisions migrate into the 107 waivers, because they're the same risk profile, right? It's the same guy flying the same drone in the same airspace. It's the same risk. So that's kind of the direction we're moving.
So I wanted to refresh one
Wait,
thing.
oh, sorry. There's one, but there's another way, right? We didn't talk about that, which is you could always call the SOSC and ask for an SGI to do that. I was remiss, and that is also available to you, whether you operate under 107 or 91. That's an option for you as well.
But in both cases, right now, currently, you're still having to fly under the facility map grid ceilings, whether you're Part 91 or you're Part 107, unless you get an SGI.
That's right. That's right. And now there's one of the advantages of these new 91-113 waivers. One of the advantages of that over, say, the 107 shielded ops waiver is that today, although it's going to change, today you get the UAS FM with the 91-113. So that's the old jurisdictional. You get that where under the 107, you're going to have to take an additional step, go back into FAA drone zone, apply for an airspace authorization. We have a guide to walk you through it, and you're going to basically get a long-term airspace authorization to be in there up to the UAS FM with that particular waiver.
So one of the things I wanted to really make clear, because you and I've had these conversations, is that the process is set up such that you've got the forms, the questionnaires, the documents. If you fill them out completely and legibly, and you're following the rules and the request, it gets processed quickly. One of the questions that comes up is, what about this tailored airspace above the facility map grids? Well, that's not in the norm. And so it's going to be outside the normal, which means it goes over into another bin and it goes into another process, which means it's obviously going to take longer.
Yes.
And, you know, I think one of the things we all agree on is we still need to have, and we're still pushing the FAA to move to push the airports to be less conservative in the facility map grids now that we know what we know, which they didn't know when they first put out. Some of them have changed them. So if you're in a space that has a lot of zero grids and you're having problems flying and you want to have that addressed, then reach out to the FAA and they might be able to have some conversations with the airport to discuss that. But that's just one of the things I've seen is, as long as you're within the norm.
I would recommend it if you think that your particular airport grids are not properly done. There is a process. I would recommend you reach out to the UAS Support Center, identify yourself as public safety, and explain that you'd like to suggest some changes to the UAS FM. There is a process to do that. I don't know it off the top of my head, but they can.
We'll try to get something out.
Connect you with it.
We'll try to get something out. And
but I get a lot of public safety say, hey, we need to fly in the zero grid, and the air traffic is. I want to set some expectations too, right? That there's these things called runway safety zones. It's very important for the safety of manned traffic that we don't mess with that, because they're getting signals from radio navigation systems, and there's lots of reasons, but so just because there's a zero grid there's probably a good reason for that. Now, there's also what we're seeing is sometimes around hospital helipads, they're putting a zero grid there just to make people aware. And speaking of hospital helipads, I do have a request of you all on this webinar. One of the things we found is that in these USS, these UAS service suppliers, they scrape the data about airspace and facilities from the FAA's database. And one of the databases they scrape is the ADIP, I forget the acronym of it, but it's basically where the airports people keep information about hospital helipads and airports and things like that. And that a lot of those hospitals have constructed hospital helipads and they haven't told the FAA about it. And if it's not in the FAA system, and there's a shockingly high number that I've found in very modern metropolitan areas, and the FAA doesn't send out legions of inspectors hunting down rogue hospitals, right? So what we need is you to, especially those of you who are HEMS people, or if you know that there's a hospital helipad and you go to the ADIP database and it's not there, that means that The FAA doesn't know about that. So we need your help to get that hospital manager or the hospital helipad, or even an operator can submit this form, and that will trigger a conversation from the airport's data people to reach out to them and say, hey, do you have a helipad? You know, and it also protects that hospital from another building being built right next to it. Anyway, sorry for that kind of diversion there, but it's important because, right, if it's in the database, it'll pop up on the UAS FM maps and the UDs. And if we don't have it, it doesn't show up there, and people don't realize there is a hospital helipad. And you know, we want to avoid those mid-air collisions, of which we've had 16 since 2017. One of which was a hospital medevac helicopter. Right. So luckily, nobody was injured.
All right, let me go
But it
through these
did cause
questions
some
real
serious
quick, and
damage.
then we'll switch gears and go to Mike for a minute. I was looking at the Google Drive documents and read the Word doc in the waiver initial instructions letter from the FAA. Is there a checklist for non-DAA? I see there was a checklist included for DAA, but not DAA applications. Sure.
So
There
those
should be a
checklists are going
form
to
in
change.
there.
The checklists are going to change a little bit. So I guess here's how I think you should look at this. If you are not going to buy a sophisticated system and you're just going to use shielded, and basically what shielded means is you're staying close to an obstruction, right? That's what shielded means. If you're just going to do that and you're going to use ADSB in, then you want the one that's the 200-foot shielded ops checklist. If you are one of the 10% that's going to buy this sophisticated system and you're going to have the electronic system that's going to detect cooperative and non-cooperative traffic and all that, then that's the one where you're going to want the DAA, the detection and avoidance one. We are going to change that to make that a little bit more clear, but that's the simplified description.
Okay, small law enforcement agency, all we want is BVLOS. Right now, 107 with a newly established program being told case currently is for us to submit a CAL that give us BVLOS, ops over people, ops over moving vehicle, but doing so restricts us to 200 feet versus 400 feet. Overkill, perhaps also since the final rule of 2021, the staying 107 allows night flight, operations over moving vehicle, and operations over people for category 1, 2, 3 with appropriate equipment, question mark. So bottom line,
is this a
easiest
question
way,
or a dissertation?
bottom line, easiest way for us to get BVLOS is the easiest way for us to get a BVLOS CAL.
So here we go, right? What do you need to do what you need to do, right? Take a step back, right? And I think 90% of the departments say we have need to go beyond visual line of sight sometimes. And most of the departments operate in areas where there are people. And if you're going to be operating beyond visual line of sight of the remote pilot, then get a category compliant drone, and then you can get the waiver to operate beyond visual line of sight.
But also,
so the rules, the 91 versus 107, in my opinion, that's the wrong thinking. The thinking is I need to do this and this and this, right? Do your con op first. What do you need to do? What rules fit best with your situation? And then what rules do you need relief from for that? And talk to people like Jason and Charles and get coached by them. But you can do either set of rules will work for you.
And you have the Part 107 obstructed shielding waiver, which also is there that can only give you up to 1 mile tactical operations under Part 107 as opposed to going the DFR route.
What's DFR?
Yeah, I'm just saying. Okay, forget DFR.
Again, no, but see, here we go, right?
Yes.
DFR
what are you trying to do?
DFR to them. See, this is why we got to come back to what's the regulation you need relief from, right?
Yeah. Are you doing tactical or are you doing a remote pilot operation?
What's tactical? It doesn't matter, right? From the flight rules, it doesn't matter. I mean, now here's a good example. SWAT team operates in a closed set, right? Essentially, it's a secure area. No civilian pedestrians are allowed in this secure area, right? Everybody inside the perimeter is wearing a Kevlar helmet and flak jackets. We're pretty good with that as a mitigation. That's a safety mitigation. It's the perimeter secured and everybody in the perimeter is wearing protection. That's a darn good safety mitigation case for the FAA was, yeah, we'll approve that, right? As opposed to, oh yeah, we're going to send the drone over the Woodstock concert and zoom around looking for people doing drugs. Not good, right? That's
Hey,
not
people.
going to,
It's not confined. They're not all cooperative people.
right. So again, right, I know I'm being, kind of a
Okay.
pain here, but
Let me
again,
keep
right,
moving.
DFR, what is
Let me
that?
keep moving here because I got more
All right.
questions. For the new 107 waiver process, BVLOS and ops over people are together in the application. If you're not interested in ops over people and just submit for
I
BVLOS,
think we just covered that.
so no
that.
parachute
So,
entry and F.
yeah, so okay, actually we touched on it, but let me go into more. So if you don't want that, it's no problem. Go back into FAA Drone Zone, apply for an operational waiver, answer all the waiver safety explanation guidelines for the regs you want relief from. So in this case, you only want relief from 107.31, no problem. Take all those 40 plus questions that are in the waiver safety explanation guidelines, copy them off the document, paste it into a Word document, answer every single one. Because now you're you're no longer in the expedited handling. You got to do it just like John Meehan's aerial survey company. But it's doable. It's very doable. In fact, the SWAT team that we worked with did that. They got it done quick, right? Because they took the waiver safety explanation guidelines, pasted them in a document, answered every one, attached it, and the mitigation, the sweetener of the deal was this is a closed perimeter. Everybody inside the perimeter is wearing helmets and Kevlar. It's like, okay, we're good with
Okay,
that.
next question. Under the new CAL, is it possible for tactical BVLOS operations using ADS-BN and no use of VO?
What's tactical BV loss? You want a waiver to 91.113.
I think what they're saying is
and you want to
what we did
but
before.
again,
Can we do what we did before under a CAL is what they're asking.
yes, absolutely.
And you can do actually more than what you could do under a tactical site waiver.
That's right. That's right.
Because the tactical waiver was also limited to emergency missions, and it was limited to
extreme
1,500 feet.
emergencies, if I remember.
And limited to 50. Yeah, it was that stretch that Mike got us to get over that hump of making the extreme part. And then we never paid any attention to it anyway. But the other part was only 1,500 feet laterally from the remote pilot. Now you're operating 2 miles.
There's no distance.
Well, it's if you can receive it and know what it is.
No, but these new waivers have no distance
and no VOs.
No VOs, no monthly reporting.
If you're meeting the requirements. No okay, yep. I'm a part of a nonprofit search and rescue organization under the direction of County Sheriff's Office when applying for Part 107 Public Safety Operations, Shielded Operations Waiver 107, 31, 39, and 145. Do I use my nonprofit's letterhead or do I use the Sheriff's Office letterhead?
Who is going to be responsible for the performance and compliance of your pilots? I think the Sheriff's Office is not going to take responsibility for you. So in that case, the public safety search and rescue organization is going to be the one who applies for it. And they meet the definition of a public safety organization in the last public law, 118-95, section 926E. So you do meet that definition. So you do qualify, that organization does qualify for a public safety organization shielded ops waiver.
So okay, just put on yours.
Hopefully that answers the question.
And again, that's why there's Part 107, that same kind of obstructed shielding waiver or organization shielded waiver under Part 107 for those non-public aircraft operations. So you could operate either way. You could operate Part 91 under the Sheriff's Office if they give you that you're agent for them, or Part 91.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, right? Because that's a great question. So then what we would do is we would write it for the Sheriff's Office.
Right.
And the Sheriff's Office can hire, Billy Bob O'Shea.
Use anybody they want. Don't say O'Shea. Right. Don't say O'Shea.
That's right. But it's up to them, right? So we would write that waiver for them because they're the responsible person. And if something bad happened,
they're responsible.
They're going to be on the hot seat with you, the drone pilot. But what typically happens, sorry, I know I'm going long here, but what typically happens is the sheriff will be like, yeah, we'd love to have you. And then when we ask the sheriff, okay, now you got to sign in blood that you're taking responsibility. They go, oh, I'm not doing that. Right. And that's fine. And that's why it typically either their legal department or the risk management people say, no, 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 no. But that's why another reason why the public safety organization 107 route is so useful, I think.
Okay, last question, then I'm going to flip over to Mike and Jason for a couple things. What would you consider life safety ops, John? We use this for fire department under county only for large scale incidents such as MCIs, 2 alarm fires
Yeah.
or larger, civil unrest with injuries. Just curious to know if there is a list we can refer to.
I'm looking for my judge's robe here. You have to be able to defend your decisions. It's like what's congested, what's not congested. There's no case law. There is some case law, I think, on some of this stuff, but you have to be able to defend your decision. I can tell you what's not, right? A flat tire or a cat in a tree, probably not, right? Probably not a life safety emergency. A hazmat spill of a rail car, probably a life safety emergency, right?
Yeah.
So, the answer is it's up to you to make a good decision and just be able to defend your decision. And if the reasonable person would agree with you, then you're probably in good shape.
So when we had the initial COA discussions back in like 2016, when I was still at DOJ with the FAA, we talked about what is a life-saving emergency. The FAA actually wanted to define that. And we actually fought that because we thought it would be wrong for Washington, D.C. to sort of define for the hinterlands what is and what isn't a life-saving emergency. But on the other end, John is exactly right. You need to make sure what you respond to with that drone beyond visual line of sight is something that the average person would say, yeah, I get that. But if you send it for a cat in a tree, the average person is going to say no. And then you're going to assume the risk.
Yeah, so what's the judge going to think?
Yeah,
when
not
he
only that,
rolls?
right? But I'm going to keep coming back to the prime directive. And this is John Meehan's personal opinion. This is not the FAA, okay? But what do we want? We want safe outcomes. We want real aviators flying real aircraft to act responsibly and to make good decisions. We know that not every decision can be a perfect decision, especially in aviation, right? You got to think fast, act fast. But we want people to make mature, responsible decisions. And some of that also involves pre-takeoff thought about, I do a lot of work in downtown where there's a lot of people around. Maybe we ought to buy a category compliant drone or equip with a parachute. Why? Well, because we've done our hazard identification, we've done our risk assessment, and we've concluded, it falls into this, right? So, that's kind of the overarching guidance it's under 107, look at 107.23, and under 91, look at 91.13. Both of those are similar. They basically say, fly responsibly, don't fly in a careless or reckless way. If the man on the street thinks you're flying in a reckless way, the judge might too, right? And the FAA might too. But again, be able to defend your decision, make good decisions, be responsible.
All right.
I think there's enough said there.
We'll close this out. I'm going to switch over to Mike to talk about the project he's working on. And then Jason, you might give a little teaser as to what we're looking at next year. So Mike.
Hey, everybody. Mike O'Shea, actually still sort of with the FAA until September 30th of this year, but on administrative leave, pending retirement, working for drone responders and taking on some projects for Charles to keep myself busy. And then one of the things I'm working on right now is how do we deal with non-cooperative drones at mass gathering events? And this started out something we're thinking about with all the FIFA events coming to the United States, major outdoor events, NFL, Major League Baseball, NCAA events, state fairs, outdoor concert venues, whatever. There needs to be sort of a process in place where we can figure out best practices to deal with non-cooperative drones. So one of the things we're working on is putting together both a presentation and sort of a training to probably, really to take some of the common sense things that people that are already doing, sort of package them together and share them across the public safety spectrum so people have a process in place they can use when they want to start working mass gathering events. And I need to make sure I tell you that there is a difference between mass gathering events and what the FAA calls mass gathering events, TFRs, because that's something that's defined into federal law, but it has nothing to do with how we determine what a mass gathering event is. A mass gathering TFR is a process for getting a TFR. It has nothing to do with what is and what isn't a mass gathering event. So I just want to make sure you don't get confused later when someone says it's a mass gathering TFR. That's a definition the FAA has based on our last reauthorization act. I saw a couple of questions in the chats about the executive orders that just came out. One was talking about dominance in the UAS airspace, and it really talks about seeding industry in the United States so we can build competitive products that eventually can be used here and exported. And it also talks about defining critical infrastructure in the United States. And some of the people ask, what does that mean to my COA or whatever? And just so you know, we've had the work on defining critical infrastructure at the FAA since 2016. It was supposed to be turned around in 6 months. Apparently, it's been a little delayed because we're in 2025. But so it's basically telling the FAA you need to finish this process. And it really should not impact public safety because usually we write these to say with exceptions for public safety on a public safety or a life-saving mission. So I wouldn't get caught up into that, but I would definitely follow to make sure that there are exceptions for public safety. Also, there's in the Restoring American Airspace Sovereignty Act, there's a couple of things I want to point out to you that really apply to mass gathering events. Because at mass gathering events, you're going to want to have good detection systems, and you're going to make sure that the detection systems you have are not in violation of the Wiretap Acts of Title 18. So Section 6 of the Restoring American Airspace Sovereignty says that they're going to have grants to purchase UAS or equipment or services for the detection, tracking, or identification of drones and drone signals consistent with the legal authorities of those state, local, tribal, territory governments. It also talks in Section 7 about automated real-time access to personal identifiable information associated with UAS remote identification signals to appropriate executive departments and agencies and SLTTs, which is you guys. That's important to know because right now, if you get information, an ID from a remote ID, you have to call a LEAP agent. He has to look it up. But in the future, you'll be able to somehow get that live. You'll be able to get that live. That's kind of important. And Section 9 talks about the integration of counter-UAS operational responses as part of the Joint Terrorism Task Forces for the purpose of protecting mass gathering events. That's important to you guys that are in the big cities that are going to have the FIFA events or have other large gathering events where you have a Joint Terrorism Task Force. Hopefully it means they're going to get the equipment to do both the detection and the mitigation that can be deployed at those events. It also talks about establishing the center, focused initial training provided by the center on development of federal and state, local, tribal, territory capabilities to secure major upcoming national and international sporting events held in the United States, such as the FIFA World Cup 2026 and the 2028 Summer Olympics. So this is all really helpful stuff when it comes to the future and dealing with mass gathering events. And I know some of you guys are saying, hey, I'm from, Western Kansas. I don't have a mass gathering event, but you probably do. You probably have a county fair, a state fair. You probably have, Friday night football where you have more than 1,000 people show up. The more people you have at an event, the more likelihood that you're going to have bad actors do something bad at that event. And so part of our goal is providing some guidance for you and some forward thinking and some pre-planning documents to assist you in dealing with those events. What we're going to ask from you guys is that you provide us best practices, lessons learned. If you have documents, if you already have a Major League Baseball stadium and you already have a plan in place to deal with non-cooperative drones, share that with us so we can put it into sort of a depository and we can share that information with other agencies that are looking to deal with mass gathering events. But look for it soon, coming soon to a webinar near you. We're hoping to do a webinar on mass gathering events. And then next week, I'll be with Jason Day in Houston, and we'll actually be presenting on this. Jason.
Thanks, Mike. Jason, you want to give a little teaser as to where Drone Responders is headed to find out more?
Want to get into a little teaser on the training stuff we're talking about? So what's great about drone responders is a huge network of public safety professionals and federal government and all of these public-private partnerships and just a mass group of people that have a whole lot of knowledge. But what everybody gets the most, what question we get the most is, where do I go for good training? Or how can I get good training, for my agency or my part of the country? So we are in the process of developing the drone responders training program, and it's going to be a 3-tiered system, so that everybody can get the type of training that they need. We're going to have online training where you'll be able to go to the website, pay a small fee, and then it will either be pre-recorded or live webinars like this to get training on specific topics like program management or any of the topics that are more of a classroom environment where you're not hands-on. Our second tier is going to be regional training events where we're going to take the instructor cadre out to different parts of the country and say, hey, we'll be here for the next 3 days. Here's all the hands-on type of training that we're going to do in this region of the country. And so really bring all of those instructors directly to you. And then the third option is going to be, you can request specific training that your agency needs. Are you at 0 and you need to build a whole program? Or are you 50%, you're doing daytime stuff, but now you need to get into all this, the more advanced operations, or build a DFR program, or payload deployment, or all of these different things. And you can customize in-house hands-on training through experienced drone responders instructors. And this is all coming to a theater very soon.
All right, everybody. I think that that's a wrap for today. Thanks, everybody, for attending. We had like 108 people here total, so we had a good attendance. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your input, your questions. Yeah, and as usual, John, thanks for the work that you've done, the team, Mike, all the work that you've done to kind of get us where we are. Jason, thanks for the new design on the website and the apps. Everybody be sure to check the apps out. They're all free. We're designed to make the information easier at your fingertips than they've ever been before. So thanks, everybody, for being here, and we will see you next month. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Bye, everybody.